All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for our next installation of our SciComm seminar series. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker now again. As most of you probably know, he needs no introduction, but I'll go ahead and give him one anyway. Dr. Eric Topol is a professor here in the Molecular Medicine Department, the Executive Vice President of Scripps Research, and the founder and director of the Scripps Research Translational Institute. He completed his medical training at the University of Rochester, followed by a residency in internal medicine at UC San Francisco and a fellowship in cardiovascular medicine at Johns Hopkins University. Prior to his tenure at Scripps, he was the chairman of the Department of Cardiovascular Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic, where he also founded the Lerner College of Medicine. He came to Scripps in 2007 and since then has led multiple initiatives and grants dedicated to promoting innovation in medicine, including the use of genomic and digital data, as well as artificial intelligence to individualize medicine. Dr. Topol is a practicing cardiologist and a member of the National Academy of Medicine. He's published over 1,000 peer-reviewed articles, as well as multiple books on the future of medicine, and has shared his messages with many audiences through a variety of media outlets. And today we're really excited to have him with us to share his insights and experiences on science communication. So we're going to be structuring this event a little bit differently from our previous seminars. Instead of a traditional seminar format, we're going to be doing a Q&A. So Melissa and I have some questions that we'll kick off with to Dr. Topol and hear some of his answers and experiences. And this will include some of the questions that you all have submitted through the registration. And we'd love audience participation. So as you guys think of questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A or the chat. And towards the second half of the seminar, we'd like to do a live Q&A to actually have your questions be answered by Dr. Topol as well. So Melissa, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Topol, for coming in today. So we'd love to kick this off by asking you to tell us a little bit about your first experiences in science communication, and specifically when you realized that science communication was something you really wanted to emphasize in your work.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's great to be with you, and I know we'll have a fun session today. Yeah, I think there was a real turning point in my career, and it happened with this medicine Vioxx that turned out to have a real safety issue with heart attacks and strokes. It was very popular. And what happened was through work that I'd done with some colleagues while I was at Cleveland Clinic, we published a paper that said, you know, there was this risk, and it was really the first paper to call that out. And we were attacked by the pharma company responsible for that drug. It was a multi-billion-dollar drug, of course. And so at any rate, I decided to write an op-ed in the New York Times. This was in 2004, so, you know, a number of years ago. And I never had done that before. I never tried to reach the public. And so when I did that, I also learned that the New York Times reserves to retitle your op-ed. So they had it Vioxx Vanquished, and it sounded really, you know, anyway. That was a turning point because I started realizing that the audience for us is not the biomedical community, but really the public. And so that was a wake-up call, and that's what kind of led ultimately to the idea of, you know, writing books, you know, and writing lots of op-eds and kind of turning communication from what previously had been, you know, textbooks and peer-reviewed articles and, you know, high science, if you will, to a whole nother genre, which is, hey, you know what, we have an obligation. We're getting supported by public funds, and we should be talking to the public and doing everything we can to help them. And so ultimately, about 12 years ago, that's kind of why I got onto Twitter and became a Twitter addict, I guess, because of that feeling that obligation that, you know, the reach is just not among our micro world, that it's a much bigger mission. And so I think it should be for all of us to be working on that, because if we do, we can crowd out a lot of misinformation, disinformation. But unfortunately, still today, scientists, physicians they're reluctant to get involved in the communication at large because they're busy and because it's got drawbacks that we'll talk about. So that's kind of the background, I think.
Thank you for that. On that note, so how do you manage some of this like pushback, or when you have all this negative feedback coming in, how do you deal with that as you try to communicate your science?
Yeah, no, it's a daily struggle and tension because you almost know you're going to get people going after you. So, you know, this drug that was very popular in the pandemic, Ivermectin, a pill that actually, you know, works really well for parasites, but not any data for helping COVID. At any rate, recently, as an example, I'm just using this as an example, there was a New England Journal paper that had the largest trial ever, you know, very rigorous with placebo control and randomized, and showed that this drug, ivermectin, had zero efficacy. And that's on top of a lot of other studies that were large that had to be withdrawn because they were fraudulent, which is unusual. And so when I posted the results and I said, this doesn't work, period. Well, they all came out. And you know what's interesting, that was a few weeks ago, and they came out again in recent days. And they have capitalized liar, 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 and you know, all this attacks and personal attacks. And you know, this happens almost every day. So it's a very trying thing. And you know, what do you do? Well, you know, when I see grotesque things that are ad hominem or clearly misinformation, I just block these people, or things less than that, mute them. But I don't have time to go play whack-a-mole with all these people, you know, whack a bot or whatever it is that, you know, they come out in force about things like this. So that is the discouraging part. On the other hand, what I really derive a lot of, I think, positive benefit is the idea of, well, I read a lot and I transmit things that I think are interesting that I've read, not just, of course, about COVID, but on topics that I'm interested in. And largely that's been COVID, of course, but in the last couple of years. But it started out, this Twitter thing started out 12 years ago. So there was no pandemic then, as far as I can remember. And so, you know, I that stimulates discussions. That's good exchange. I learn a lot every day through other people's posts. And so I think the net benefit is real, but on any given day, I may want to give up. You know, it can be tough. You have to be hardened, you know, you have to be callous to all the people out there that are just looking for trouble, looking to be, you know, really the misanthropes and misinformation that is abundant.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more about being in the public eye. Like, how has this really affected your life? Either that, you know, in regards to pushback and challenges from, you know, kind of the haters out there, or from people who are really supportive.
Yeah, I think what was really, I think, interesting is with COVID, I had no background in infectious diseases, in epidemiology, in virology, or immunology, anything. My interest, of course, is in genomics and digital. And of course, we're very lucky because Christian Anderson is really a virologist, immunologist, a real expert in the pandemic outbreak. So, you know, certainly learned a lot from him. But early on, really February of 2020, I had the sense that this was going to be a lot bigger than a lot of people were forecasting, because that's one of my pet things, is try to predict the future of medicine. And here I was trying to immerse myself and be basically autodidactic. What can I learn from others? How can I get up to speed? And so as outside the forest, if you will, I had no right to be considered having any expertise, but at least I could contribute as a person who likes to deal with data and evidence, and, you know, try to parse through all the different papers that get published on any given day, including preprints. And so that's what I took upon as a role. what I didn't know is that was going to, lead to a lot of media connects and, going on various cable news or, print journal stuff and that kind of thing. So I actually have no problem with that, just because I'd done that a lot in other areas of medicine, and whether it was genome editing for CRISPR, or whether it was, the latest things in artificial intelligence and digital. So I'd had a lot of background and fully comfortable. I actually enjoy communicating to the public and to media journalists and whatnot. For me, it's always been kind of a natural thing, because I try to simplify things. So, we've worked with Alan Alda, and one of the things that was really funny to help convey this is that back in the first year of the pandemic, Science asked me to write a brief review about COVID and the heart. And I wrote this review, and I got the reviews back from Science. And one of them was, "This is written at the 6th grade level." Okay. And I laughed. I said, "That's great. That's just what it was aimed for." So I sent it to Alan Alda, because, he and I kind of got friendly over the course of the pandemic, and we were working with Alan and his communications company, which is just what we're talking about. And he wrote, and then we talked about it later. He said, "This is the nicest compliment you ever received." So basically, I don't know if you want to call it, dumbing it down, but getting rid of all the inside baseball jargon. That's what we don't do enough in science. And since this is a SciComm seminar, that's what I learned. I'm always learning it. I mean, there's certain times that things are reported. It's hard to get it down to a level that anyone could understand, but that's our job. And if we don't do that, we're not really communicating. And so I don't think we can ever do it perfectly, but I enjoy trying to get better and better at that.
That's really great to hear. On that note, since you've mentioned kind of publishing and sharing your stories in different outlets, when you think about crafting your message for, somewhere like Science versus like an interview versus Twitter, how do you go about crafting these messages? Like, how do you think about kind of communicating to these various audiences?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. What I've learned over the years is the better you are, like if I give a lecture and it's a lecture to a science group, or it's a lecture to, a lay public, no science background group, I give the same lecture now, the exact same slides, but they're not packed with all kinds of stuff on them. And basically what I've learned is now if I put in an NIH grant, I don't put in a grant like I would have put in, 20 years ago. I put it in one that anyone from the public, even though the reviewers are not public, would be able to read. So I think that's really what I've learned is to speak to your audience as if they have no science background and take them through. Now, what is the cost of that? Well, you'll have some high science people to say, you're really not very good at all. You're not up to par because you're not trying to wow us, right? On the other hand, when you do that, you're kind of the reductionist simplification. The net benefit of that, I think, is actually quite extraordinary. So yes, you'll have some trade-offs. You'll have some people say, he's talking at a level that is just too elementary. But if you really work at it, you can actually fully fulfill expectations of the whole spectrum of people. And that's what we should be doing. And I think there is a way to do that. And I'm always exploring new ways to do that, of course. And, it's a challenge. It's fun, actually.
Yeah, sounds like it. So I'm curious about how you balance advocating for science advances or technology, what have you, versus the hesitancy a lot of scientists feel in supporting very binary answers, whether something, masks are good with COVID, for example, or, anything else that comes up, maybe not necessarily COVID related.
Yeah, that's a really great question because there's so many, nuances and I think complexities, and nothing is binary, right? So that's kind of why I ultimately in December decided I'd go into the Substack form of communication, because I learned that even with 240 characters or a thread, you still couldn't communicate well. So I basically used the Substack as write a longer essay that, again, is not to be too overloaded with fancy words, but rather try to spell it out a bit more, not, I kind of learned that, going through these threads were tedious and tiresome. People just want to go to the bottom one to get the final word. I know, and there's just so much complexity, like whether it's, as you say, the mask or the boosters or Paxlovid or, you name it, there's always another part of it that's not so straightforward. So I have been using that. I think that is a good platform for expressing your views and summarizing data. But I had a very tough session with the Substack CEOs, co-CEOs, because the fact that they are having people write on that platform who are very popular, who are spreading misinformation. And this kind of ties in with the whole Elon Musk purchase of Twitter, whereby you want to have free speech and freedom of expression. And I'm a big proponent of that. But when it's publicly harming people, I think that's where we have to draw the line. So I don't care, freedom of expression politically, or, you name the domain, I don't have any problem with that. But when you are putting out things deliberately, twisting things that people will die from or wind up, very seriously ill, that's a real problem. So I've had some second thoughts about Substack. I'm still writing, but not as frequently, because I after I had this session with the CEOs, they haven't backed down. They say we have to have a neutral platform. And I say, well, neutral, but it's hurting people and health. And so that one isn't settled. I don't know how Elon Musk is going to deal with that, because as you know, many people who were overtly lying about COVID and hurting people, they were censored. And is he going to bring them back? I mean, there already are pleas on Twitter for bringing back these people. So this is a problem. I think, where do you draw the line on freedom of expression? And I think it's really unfortunate that platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Substack and all of them are really struggling to how to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a big problem that we feel as scientists, and we see it really actively on Twitter. In your experience, I know you really use Twitter a lot, but are there other tools or platforms that you would recommend that maybe may alleviate some of these issues, or maybe have other avenues where we can kind of communicate our work without some of these problems?
Well, I kind of wish there was a Twitter devoted to, science and biomedicine, and that would be really great. And that you had to have names, anonymous people on it, that, everybody's responsible for what they post. That would be my dream. There is no such site though. Yeah, so that would be Twitter is a nervous system for the science community. And as soon as there's an important paper preprint, you'll see, basically there's much more peer review there automatically, quickly, and anything that's of interest than you might get through 2 or 3 peer reviewers of a paper that's being submitted. So I think it is a tremendous way to get that online rapid and often by expert assessment. But we just don't have anything like that. We should strive to have that. I would think it would be in the best interest of the whole science community to develop that. But as you know, when papers are posted in journals and they have comment areas, they get very little traffic. And also, I think it's important that people, when they post, they have to be responsible for what they post. And the whole idea that you can do that anonymously isn't right. That is, you have to own it. And that isn't the fact that we can get away with people who say horrible things to others and they don't have, and you don't know who they are. And if you do know who they are, you can ruin your reputation in one post, right? So I think that is a really important area that isn't yet addressed adequately.
Yeah, definitely some really great points there about the anonymity of social media just making all these platforms more negative, definitely, and not as great of an experience for everyone. So especially with social media, because a lot of the, what you're reading in your news feed is very curated, and, they have these algorithms to make sure it's something that you'll want to look at and stay on the social media app for longer. I'm wondering your views on how to escape kind of this echo chamber of similar viewpoints. How do you try and, obviously in your experience, but also broadly, how can people expand what they're seeing, or how do we get the general public to see views they might not normally be interested in?
That's a great question too. You don't want to be in a bubble. You want to be able to see the other side. So I purposely follow people who I know are, in another orbit of thought. But as long as they're people who I think are rational, and, I respect them, because I do respect other views, even when there's kind of polarity of views. As long as the people, I think we have to make an effort to, not be so insular in our people, that the community that we follow. I follow like 500 people, so relative to others, it's not that many, but I try to be very careful about those, picking those people that I know many have disparate views, and some would say, well, why are you following those people? I say, well, it's healthy. It's healthy to see the other side. It's important, actually. But there's the other side where they're completely bonkers, and I just have a hard time with that group. I just can't. I don't want to see what they're writing every day. Yeah. And just while you're mentioning about the curating thing, so just to be clear, some people think I have this army of people that help me to Twitter post. I want to be 100% clear about that. I write every post. I make the graphic for every post that I put. There's now over 40,000 over these 12 years. Half of it is in the last 2 years. So I don't have any help. All right. So these people that keep thinking that I have this staff that does Twitter posts for me, they have to know unequivocally that everything comes from me. I know that may be hard to accept, but you can ask all the people I work with. They have nothing to do with my posts. I may learn from them, of course, but everything I post, I'm responsible for. And why is that important? Because I don't believe in ghost anything, whether it's ghost papers, ghost tweeting, ghost anything. It has to come from the person. And so the idea that someone would tweet for someone else, to me, is totally unacceptable. So just to be clear about that, because there's still, all these years, there's still people that think I have this staff. And when I go to a meeting, in person, they say, well, gosh, how many people work on your staff? I said, this is it. This is the staff. So just to be clear about that.
Yeah, thank you for obviously addressing that. I think I agree with you. It's very important to be responsible in knowing what is being posted, and obviously it makes you much more involved in everything that's going on, that you're the one making the posts and interacting with the public.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, of course, I've learned is like, what posts are those that are most interesting to others? And there's certain things that, like, for example, I've always liked to look at comics. I like cartoons. And for years, for probably the first 10 years on Twitter, I had this thing called Our Digital Times, because I'm into digital stuff. And some of those got, tremendous interest. But what I learned is people look to social media for humor. I mean, they want to be, they want some levity. They don't always want, hardcore new findings. And so I learned quickly. So that's why I started in the pandemic, our COVID times. And some of those have been, just incredible hits. So I think when you're on social media, knowing your audience, one of them is people like humor. And another, there's certain topics that are really out there popular. Like people are really interested in diet. But nobody knows what is the right diet. And so when a new paper comes out about that, and these are just examples of things that people generally are very interested in. Also, because it's impossible to keep up with the literature, if you're finding particularly useful sources, reviews, this is really great to share because so many other people will be grateful to you. So that's something I think that's not out there enough, is knowing your audience and learning your audience as time goes on.
Yeah, definitely a very important part of science communication, knowing who you're talking to. And going off of that, I'm interested, like, when you're thinking about communicating science, not only who your audience is, but at what stage during, scientific endeavors, whether that's research or working with patients directly through medicine or say public health advances, like at what point should scientists, maybe the people out there in the audience today, should be considering science communication? Because I know with like biostatistics, they always say you need to think of the statistics, as you're planning the experiment, don't think of it afterwards. And I'd love to hear your comments on thinking about communicating science throughout the process of doing science.
So you mean along the way when you're in the midst of a experiment, or?
Yeah, I'm interested maybe in like, how does science communication affect how you think about science, and how should, like, say, bench work or something else like that be affected by how maybe one day down the road you will be communicating your findings?
Oh, okay. Well, I think everyone, when they're training in a career in science, a big part of that is training in this part. Because I don't see how in this day and age you can be a real success in science without being a good communicator. And it doesn't happen naturally. We don't have, it's not encoded in any gene that I know of in our genome, or any variants that make one person a better communicator than another. So I think it's really important. The problem we have is a lot of our mentors are not good science communicators. They're really good scientists, but they haven't gotten on board. So you need to find those people who are really good at this, who, like, for example, you're giving you're getting warmed up for a presentation about your results, and you want somebody in the room or in the Zoom or whatever, who is, one of these people that is facile with communication. And that way your presentation goes to another level, right? So you show your passion. You translate to the uninitiated. So important. We'd already discussed that. You emphasize, you flag things, sometimes more than one time, so people don't miss it. And all these other pointers for being a master communicator, like a master class in science communication. So everyone needs that. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't get it. And we're going through a generational shift. I do think that most young scientists will have some background and training in that. But I learned over the years that every presentation will be improved by having somebody review it for how good is it and the level of communication. Forget about the content. How good is it being communicated? And typically, before going to a meeting when these would be presented, for oral presentations especially, that warm-up time, in a half hour, you could take a presentation of someone's really good work and take it from a B or a C to an A+. And it doesn't take much. It just takes that kind of input. And we should do that all the time when someone has results. If they're good enough for submitting to a meeting or a paper, they should be good enough for how do you get that presented so that other people are excited about your work. Not just your mother or your parents, but other people who you don't know would be excited and want to cite your work and want to read more about it. And how do you put it in context? So it might not just be your experiment and your paper, but rather what is it, the bigger picture, the 30,000 foot view. And I'll give you an example of that. So last week I did an interview with Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg, a live interview about their aspiration to end all diseases by 2100, which is kind of a bold goal. I mean, to cure and prevent all disease by 2100. But the context was that there already was a paper about this written in 94 to end all diseases by 2050, which we're not going to accomplish. I mean, you'll get to see that at 2050. I don't think I'll be around to see that. But the point is that that context for them, they set up and have put billions of dollars into this initiative to end all diseases, but they didn't even know that there had been this previous forecast by 2050. So when you start to bring in other things, it makes it more interesting, of course. But that's why when you're really communicating things, that you want to have some nuggets in there that would be of general interest, that are pertinent to the topic at hand. And I think there's lots of ways to enrich not just your own science, but the flanked by, things that are germane to that work.
Yeah, thank you for that. At this point, we're going to take a little bit of a break from hearing our voices, and we have a couple questions from the audience that we'd like to go ahead and invite them to ask live to you, if they're able to. Otherwise, we'll read out their questions on their behalf. So the first question we have is from Heejin. So Heejin, I'm going to hopefully unmute you if you'd like to ask your question.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Heejin.
Hey, Professor Topol. Thank you for the talk. I read your Twitters almost every day and appreciate for you give so many important information and in-depth analysis today. Yeah, you just mentioned that you did all this by your own. I was pretty curious about how you manage your time to do so many stuff with in-depth analysis on Twitter. And I think you already have some other important academic things to do in the meanwhile.
Yeah. My wife wonders about that, family about that too. You have to be kind of a lunatic. So basically what it is being an info junkie, right? So, what I'll do is I got meetings, a lot of times throughout the day, or I'm preparing some kind of talk, or we're writing editing for writing for grant. What I'm doing the same sort of things you might expect, or one day a week seeing patients like yesterday. But when I'm not doing the things I'm supposed to be doing, I'm looking for things that are stimulating, that are informative, and sharing that. So what I would submit is that almost everybody, maybe they might not be quite as much of an info lunatic as me, but you read a lot of stuff and you don't share it. And my contention is that if everybody shared what they read that was interesting, we all get smarter faster. And so some people will say, well, this guy's a freak because he's posting, 10, 15 Twitter posts a day about this stuff. And how could he possibly, consume that? Some people have described me as an AI agent rather than a human being. But it doesn't take me long. I can get to the heart of the matter of a publication pretty quickly without having to read every word. Sometimes I'll get it wrong and, I'll have to correct things, but most of the time, fortunately, I'll be able to get the right call. And that gets to another point about, how important graphics are to communicate. I mean, people don't read as much as they used to. And so you really want to either make your own graphic or use a graphic from a post. Anyway, I enjoy it. I don't know what's going to happen to the Twitter platform in the post-Musk era, if that all works out, because I'm not sure where that's headed, but hopefully it'll be preserved, or the kind of science one that we've discussed will exist at some point. At any rate, it's a question that I wonder about every day, especially when you get attacked. Why am I doing this? And wouldn't I be better to read books instead of reading articles, and not just paying attention to sharing information? But I do still maintain that we don't share enough, and I'm trying to set some type of an example for that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, especially for those like with cartoons, it's really very helpful to the public audience. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
All right, we have another audience question. This one's going to come from Stefano. I think I have unmuted you if you are around and like to ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, Eric. Great talk. And I was actually pestering you as well with questions at the department meeting. I was curious, what is your take on the fact that the work that you and others are doing is downhill to the major problem, which is educating the masses? Because what you're doing is you cannot individually picking every single person that doesn't understand the fundamental problems and the way in which these problems are addressed. And then basically you are bound to lose in some sense, because they lack logical reasoning, and they most importantly, they all share a fundamental distrust with science and whatever is seen as the establishment. And this, at least my understanding, is that this starts from schools. So the problem is that kids and people that are now adults were not prepared to what the world looks like right now, and the fact that you can have, I'm not talking about discerning between reasonable or trustable or not trustable sources, but the fundamental understanding of the reality or the consequences of things, and the correlation between you take a vaccine and then you don't die, and then people are interpreting that like, oh, isn't that surprising that all the people that don't take the vaccine die? You know, that might be a conspiracy. They're killing people that don't bend their knee, whatever. So what do you think about that? Because that's a daunting task.
Yeah, well, thanks, Stefano. This is a really critical area you're raising, and how do we promote truth, facts, evidence, data, science, right? One of them is, there's many routes, of course. One is through education, but there are things that we haven't done, which we could. So with respect to the pandemic and vaccines being one critical, essential component of that, before the vaccines were even out in late 2020, we knew they were coming, and there was nothing that was done to counter what was known to be a significant American anti-vax, anti-science cult. I mean, significant. So this whole idea of pre-bunking, of having as many people in the science community and also a counter aggression started, you know, at the government level. So you may remember during the Trump years that there was this guy on CNN, Dale, who every day did a fact checks on things all the lies that he told.
Yeah.
And he actually became extremely popular, and it was a one-man show, right? And here it's a much bigger ordeal with respect to vaccines and masks and all the science surrounding evidence in the pandemic. But what we needed was a team at, part of the White House response team that was the truth team. And every day debunking, pre-bunking before the vaccines were out there. But every day, the truth, here's the evidence about masks, here's the evidence about isolation and, whatever. And instead, what did we get? We got a confusional state with our public health agencies making things worse by saying, oh, you don't need a mask, boosters, we don't know about that. Isolation after 5 days, if you're feeling okay, go ahead. I mean, just stupid stuff, right? And we lost trust. So what you're really getting at, Stefano, is not only did we have science distrust, lack of trust, but we promoted it because our leading public health agencies, rather than engaging on centering on truth and facts, and on a daily basis, calling out by name Tucker Carlson or whoever, Newsmax, whoever the source was, by name, and putting them in the hall of shame. We didn't do any of that. There was no misinformation counter-aggressive campaign. And added to that, we had infighting among public health agencies that was severe. It's still ongoing. And we have a confusional state. We have, of all the countries in the world, we ranked over 70 for booster shots. And that's incredible because that's why so many older people are still dying. In fact, today, a Washington Post article about most of the people dying in the US now are vaccinated because they didn't get boosted and because we have a failure of science communication. And we also have mistrust, of course, about vaccines in general. So these are factors that, it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. We didn't do the things we could have done, and the things that we take for granted that a public health agencies like CDC and FDA would do, they didn't do that. And look what we have to show for it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a little bit worried because it seems like I agree 100% on that, especially on the specific targets you named, but it feels like you're pushing the dam a little bit higher uphill. I was shocked when I saw that there were anti-mask movements back in 1900 when the influenza pandemic started. So that made me think that there must be something really fundamental in terms of the resistance that the public is putting on those measures. And I agree with you. It's 100% or 99% a communication problem. And having a strategy might help, although I'm still worried that ignorance, it's something that is going to win because of the fact that the sheer amount of people that you're fighting against. So I think I think the education still is a very important, and it boils down to the whole point of this presentation, which is communication. So there's no point in like distilling everything into a boring book that people will forget if you don't communicate science and important concepts in the right way. Yeah, thank you.
This is a multi-tier complex strategy. I only kind of zoomed in on part of it, but you're absolutely right. I mean, this has not been seriously undertaken at a national level. And we are an outlier if you compare to peer countries in Europe and in Asia, Australia, New Zealand. We are just, in a very different state than most of the world, because what's happened, especially in recent times, is this mistrust issue has gotten far worse. And there's not been a strategy developed to counter it. I do go back to the original point I made in that if more people in the science community were outspoken, crowded out the bad actors, that would help too.
True, very good point. Thank you. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Stefano. And actually, on a related note, we have a question from an anonymous attendee, so I'll read it out on their behalf. But what do you recommend we as scientists, granted there's a lot that can be done on the federal level, state level, but what do you recommend that we as scientists can do to kind of send these cohesive messages about things like COVID, about the other disasters that are kind of really imminent, if not already present around the world? Other ways that we can kind of show this way of, sending a message for action and trying to avoid anything that may come forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously many other pressing matters. I mean, climate change is obviously another one that we haven't, not nearly the kind of action we need to grapple with this. And we just saw a paper this week about how that is having, interdependence with zoonotic spillovers and more pandemics that lie ahead. Again, I think that's part of our job. It should be that isn't just our science that we do. It should be working on big matters, being activists. So what I think you're getting at is we don't have enough activists. 10 people in the science and medicine, life science space, they tend to be hunkered down and, zooming in on their particular interests. That's great, but there's no reason why you can't also be an activist at the same time. And there's good causes to be activists, right? I mean, and I'd like to try to promote that. And there's ways to do it now that are a lot easier than, years in the past, because I mean, you can reach millions of people every day through social media if you're an activist. So I hope to stimulate that. I mean, if we got everybody to be an activist who working in the science space, oh my gosh, it'd be a different world. But right now we're at the 1%, maybe less. So, we have a lot of work to do.
All right, we have someone in the audience who has their hand raised. Ahmed, I'm going to allow you to talk and you can ask your question live.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Topol. Thank you for being here today. I just have a question. I'm sorry if I missed it. I joined a bit late, but like you mentioned earlier, like people don't really have much time to read anymore. So I just have a question about like within the scientific community, like these days you read all these articles and they are written in a very confusing way. And sometimes you feel like it's written this way on purpose. But for me, as someone who's like, English is not my first language. And when you're like bilingual, you tend to have a different perspective when you read something. I don't think it's translates 100% at someone with like English with English as a first language. But so it might be like my own issue here, but I want to know like how did we get there, like people writing science in this way, like as if it's being made difficult on purpose for the audience. I'm talking about the scientific within the scientific community itself. And what will be your advice for us when like writing paper? Like what would we like keep in mind to just simplify things, because you know nobody has any time to read these.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing up a central point, and thanks for that. So, I look at the titles of papers, and often I get nauseous. Okay, just the title alone scares me away because it's so esoteric. And like, why would anybody want to read this paper, right? Yeah. And most of them have this, title. So the packaging of a paper starts with that. You want a title that at least people want to read the darn thing, right? Yeah. Then when you get into the paper, what I like to do is, get it simplified. So what I hate are these figures that have, 22 panels. You go from the one figure 2 has panels A through M. It's like, what? I mean, help me. I just want the one figure that tells the story, the gold, if you will, right? And I like to put all the stuff in the supplementary material that isn't vital, because nobody reads that. I'm just wanting to read the article. And so, I think we can do so much better to use the way the current format to make it appealing and alluring to read. But what it is we overwhelm, we drown people. We're trying to like show off how much data we have and how many figures we can jam in a given paper. That isn't the if you look back at the most cited papers in the history of life science, like the famous DNA paper, that was, I think, 2 pages with one figure. I mean, that's what you want to strive for. We have gone so far away from that, and it's almost like people are trying to have a contest of how esoteric, how flooded of information you can have. And it's unfortunate. We have to go the other direction, I think, in order to get reading of papers more commonplace.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you. We do have 2 questions in the Q&A section, and they're kind of similar, going off of what you were talking about with articles. So kind of, do you have any advice for people in terms of creating effective figures and then knowing when maybe your article or something, whatever you're writing, is complete or say good enough for the audience you're targeting?
Yeah, so the graphics are the key. The title and the graphics to me are the most important thing. If you have just one really great graphic and a very good title that is short and not fancy words in it, that's the start, right? And then, I think, unfortunately, that's the rare paper today that you see. I think one of the things I learned in writing in books, having good editors, which is really, that's an interesting thing, by the way. when you write a book, you have one editor, that's your peer review, who doesn't even know your topic, who's a literary person. Imagine that, and you publish a book that you want, hundreds of thousands of people to buy, and how different that is from science communication writing, when you have peer review and they want you to put in more stuff, more data, more evidence. So what I learned from writing books, which I actually never thought I'd wind up doing in a career, but the editors would just get rid of words. Get rid of as many words as you could. Now, their motivation is twofold. One is they have to pay for the pages. They don't want to pay for the pages. The paper's precious. And secondly, they understand readability. And we don't in the science community. We just don't get it. The less words, the better. So if you look at the limit and say, oh gosh, the limit's 3,000, 5,000 words, I'm going to use every word. No, you want to, if you can say it in 100 words, do it, right? And so that's another problem we have is we're very wordy. And, when you go through a science paper, I don't know, most of them can get cut substantially. And I don't mind shifting stuff to the supplementary materials and appendices, because that's where it belongs for the people who are just so into it, the nerd nagels of that space. They can read all that stuff, but you want to appeal to the people who are not so deep into your topic.
That's really great advice. Thank you so much. I know we have just a couple minutes left, so I'll kind of just end by asking, is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't really had the chance to touch upon during this Q&A?
Well, the only thing I'd say is this is my favorite topic. So when you all approached me to talk about it, I was thrilled to do it because I've learned a lot and I'm still learning. I learn every day, right? And we all should be working on that to be better at this, because ultimately we can, as Stefano asked, help establish trust in science. Scientists are pretty high up on the high regard still, even with all the hits that have been taken, as to trust in from the public. And we want to take that to a much higher level. But with trust comes trying to be transparent and trying to use simple language, even to express complexity. You can do it simply, succinctly, also, with emotion and excitement, the human side, the human connect that we don't tap into enough. And everybody hopefully is excited about their work, that somehow they have to convey that, right? But conveying it doesn't mean picking esoteric titles and having, gazillion figures and data points that you're trying to wow people. You're going to wow them ultimately in a whole different opposite way. So hopefully this has been a fun discussion. I've enjoyed it with you all. I think, it's a never ending part of our work. But I also would say that here it is in 2022, and we are in a nascent phase of getting to be good science communicators. Hopefully we'll get much better over the years ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Topol, for taking the time today to chat with us. Thanks to everyone for joining this Q&A session, and keep an eye out for our next session for our seminar series. Should be sometime in early June.
Terrific.
So with that, we'll close out and hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.